Thank you. Thank you for having me, and my pleasure to be here. And hats off to all of you that pulled off this digital conference in the face of all of the fun that we're having in the world right now. So very nicely done, and again, my privilege to be here. Today, I'm going to take you through our thought process in terms of where we're trying to guide clients and how we're trying to respond to client needs in the most strategic ways possible, and help them understand how to take full advantage of much of the componentry and much of the wrestling match they're having today around how to bring business value and bring economic value into an ever more complex environment. And we can discuss at length also the current crisis in terms of how that will kind of accelerate the need for digital presence and the capability to be digital out there in the market as a part of almost every enterprise we can imagine. But the base premise pre-COVID remains the same, and we think accelerates as we come out of this COVID-oriented environment. And quite simply, if we move on to the second slide, the world's a myriad of complex choices in complex organizations that need to think about complexity of integration. And when you think back 10 years ago and you think about where we were, in 10 years ago environment, maybe even 15 years ago environment, you made choices as an enterprise, and you had to pick whose shop you were. You were a .NET shop. You were a Java shop. You used a monolith like a large SAP system or a large Oracle financial system. And by and large, these systems all delivered value, and you lined up to the technology of the day behind which one of these beliefs that you had. The monolith provides you most of the value, and you'll use partners and integrations and kits around the monolith. You'll use .NET, and you'll be a part of that family. You'll subscribe to the Java circles, and you'll follow the technologies and the open standards and some of the camaraderie that came out of the Java circles as well. And none of them were right, none of them were wrong. They simply existed at that point in time, and it was a choice you made. And the choice was simplifying. The choice enabled you to constrain the number of vendors that you saw, the number of different solutions that you had. And people thought much more in the notion of frameworks and application platforms and full stacks in terms of what they did. And so you really got guided along with this, and you had choices to make and vendors to evaluate and things to do, but it was a dramatically simplified set of choices than you have today. What I find in my first year at Persistent, which just has come to eclipse, is the number of choices in front of us is daunting. And for those of you that know Persistent, we don't do a lot of legacy work, right? We don't convert old code. We don't run a lot of systems for people. We don't sit in data centers as an IT outsourcing company. Our projects, nearly all of the 700 projects that we do at any point in time, are running across people that are trying to advance the idea that the digital phenomena is something they need to take advantage of. And in this digital phenomena, they need to do one of two things. They either need to create new services that they can sell for value, things such as a new digital bank, things such as a different way of taking care of patients, or perhaps a new way of digitally integrating your manufacturing systems. Or they need to create something that affects the bottom line, which is we're going to use these new digital systems, the promise of cloud, and we're going to reduce our bottom line out of this. And in some cases, clients are trying to do both. When they move through this complexity of all the choices they have today, what they find is that they're in an any-to-any oriented cycle of discussion. You are accepting in a world today that you're going to be multi-cloud. You're accepting in a world today that you're going to blend certain multi-cloud solutions together. You're accepting in a world today that data will exist in different forms and that the engines that operate on that data may be derived by different services that all access and use that data for different types of derived business benefits. And so you're now staring not only at a complexity of choice, but you're staring at a complexity of integration. And our contention from having worked through this with multiple different enterprises that we engage with is the world's actually a slightly more challenging place today, if not dramatically more challenging place today, with increasing complexity of choice and increasing complexity of integration. So in my first year at Persistent, I sat back and I kept hearing of all of these cases where we raised the discussion beyond just a piece of integration, a piece of work to be done, an augmentation, and we actually worked with the customer then to develop the solution and work into the next environment. And typically what we found when we got there, if we move on to slide number 3, please, was an environment where the enterprise had been starting to work on the components themselves, whether it's at the cloud platform layer or at a microservices component layer or at the analytics components, including things like AI and other services that you want to use. And they were working in silos, and they were dealing with multiple vendors in silos. And the connectivity to these silos didn't quite exist in the way that they wanted to be able to see it. And typically, they reach out for help. Right? They reach out for help either on depth of any one of these silos or on how to make these silos get closer to the other one and create solution value. Because solution value only happens when these silos work together. And I had the interesting artifact that being at a U.S. corporation that was working on its approach to creating a digital wallet. And what I found as we worked through that, the components started to sound very much the same. I traveled a couple of weeks later over to a UK credit union where we're doing work on helping them be a digital credit union. And in both cases, the business desires at the top are very similar in terms of being able to leave brick and mortar behind, to use digital presence, to not have to engender the classic long-term build-out that they had before, and to use the composability or the swappability of components so that as components changed and evolved, they don't have to rework their entire architecture. And these similarities were startling. And what we found was that patterns were beginning to emerge, and our ability to satisfy customer demands and desires got more crisp the more we were able to not only talk about a particular component, like a low-code system or an analytics platform or an AI engine or somebody's particular cloud platform where we had certification, but if we go on to the next slide, what we found was when we started to talk to them as a system and when we started to present the customer our knowledge base on the systems that we see others using and the best practices that we've done with others, the conversation went far faster, it went far smoother, and it yielded value. It yielded customers now talking about, can you get the system to work with us in a way that we can start to really focus on the customer experience, the business services that are created, and at the end of the day, the value that you derive, whether it's new services or a savings. But we really want to work at the layer of these orange boxes. And then we want you to help us now with how to make the right choices and how to get this together. And last, we understand that all these boxes don't actually touch each other today, so some integration is always going to be required. And then whether it's a simple adapter, whether it's a simple integration kit, or whether it's something more complex where maybe a vendor has multiple acquisitions that they're integrating and our services are required to help do it, the ability to address the point problem in context of the whole becomes the discussion. And raising the discussion up to what experience you're trying to drive, whether it's with a customer or a user or a business, becomes the key litmus question that we've started to train ourselves to ask all the time. And it's essential as we think about anybody that makes services that they understand where they fit in the complete component model. And while we all have marketing teams that at times can kind of show hyper extensibility of our software products and services, we also all have strength areas where our products are heavily used and most readily used and most apt to be applied in the first instance. And understanding what you might run into in terms of how you sit with your next neighbor and what you do is just absolutely critical. And so as we, for example, worked with the system in the United States and worked with the system in the UK and laid out what cloud platform they wanted to be, happened to be Amazon in this case, laid out what financial services engine they wanted to use, happened to be Mambu in that case, laid out what integration automation engine, and one of them was Appian, one of them was an OutSystems, right? And the choices they were making as to why we're able to help guide to the total solution as well as to the attributes of the individual software problems that you may have and the software attributes, the positive points that you may run into by using particular pieces of software in the right spot. we started to lay this out, and I started to refer to them as tiles. And we think of these now as tiles in what we call a business mosaic or an enterprise mosaic. And like a mosaic, you lay out the tiles in the right way and you have a picture. You lay out the tiles in a way that doesn't make sense and you have confusion. And the tiles need correct connective tissue to tie them together as well. And what we found was these tiles need to lay out in a way that engenders best practices and also an appropriate discussion. And quite simply, it's enabled Persistent to also run a better client discussion about what do you want, what's the architecture you desire, to what solution, than I think we ever have before, rather than what technology are we trying to help you do, which is a consistent question that Persistent's been known for. It's helped us raise the question up to another level to now talk about the solution. And so when we look at this and we think about the enterprise environment today, and we think about the myriad of services that are there in the form of either software products or online digital services, we think of them now in terms of how do they fit in terms of a mosaic of possible solutions you want. I'll stick with my banking and finance-oriented example. Do you want a wallet? Do you want a credit union? Do you want a digital bank? What do you need to be able to attach to you, and who are you? And to what degree of depth do you have legacy systems, and to what degree do you want this to be a digital sidecar that you use to go after new business? All become discussions we can start to have. And then also working backwards with the software community, it allows us really to bring in software for exactly what it's purpose-built to do and help lay it out the right way. So in our world, reducing the complexity and reducing the integration becomes a discussion on first getting the top-down picture right of ultimately how are you going to use this as a solution and what are the business services you're going to provide at the same time. Let's go on a slide. If you do this correctly, it becomes a layer that also permeates through the enterprise. So what we actually found in some of the larger institutions where we're doing this is not only do we help them with a current solution, but you get a reusability or a depth-oriented perspective on the components at the same time, and it allows you to go through the enterprise with a depth-oriented discussion also of other services, other capabilities, other users, other communities that might derive a value or might derive a benefit by thinking this manner. And it also sets up a stepwise approach to potentially even reorganizing significant parts of your enterprise. And as we all know, the enterprise is on a very wide conversion discussion. We know that most of the enterprise applications haven't moved, and they're looking for how do I move? Do I move as an app as I am today, or do I move with a sidecar that enables value that I don't have today? Do I do a little bit of both? And am I positioning one for the other? And in every step I take, am I moving forward on that journey of remaking who I am and also the new services that are out there? And we see the stratification across all industries wanting to do this. Persistent focuses heavily on banking and finance, healthcare, and industrial sector as industry groups, and we use this also to leverage with our technology organizations as well. So it gave us even a construct for how to rethink Persistent and who we are at the same time. So this notion of a repeatable pattern helps the enterprise move beyond just even a project and into other scope and other capabilities that are there today, and really help go with depth into the different discussion groups that they want to have with their own constituents, which could be part of what Persistent helps with or leads. But likewise, it helps as a leave behind for them to be able to have the discussion amongst themselves of that new project now engenders future projects to take advantage of it as well, which we think is the real power behind the digital transformation we see so many groups doing today. If we think about the post-COVID world, this will accelerate, right? The need to show preparedness for a secondary or a tertiary-oriented event of this happening again will be a much more real business thought process in every enterprise. And while it's always been on our horizon, I think the degree of depth that we're all experiencing today, as I sit in my office and do this from remote North Carolina, and you hold a remote conference today that is of astounding effectiveness, will become a business reality for everybody, whether they think about that at a provider level, whether they think about it that at an industrial manufacturing level, or an order-to-cash system, or a partner marketing portal where they work with their partners, or whether it has to do with banking or some other travel or track and trace oriented solution. This notion of we better be thinking of how to digitally extend it, how to extend it beyond brick and mortar, will become part of how they start to think about building next generation business value as well. And this will be very, very powerful as a metaphor for clients to think about digital transformation and where they're going, and the notion of tried and true patterns. We were on the phone with a large community of banks in another region of the world talking to us about their needs to roll out digital banks to all their member banks. And we quite simply had a discussion. Do you want to start from whole cloth as a consultant-oriented discussion, or do you want to start from tried and true? And the answer we usually get is let's go tried and true, and let's advise in on where we want to do the percentage of change. And so I believe, and what we found is that the digital pattern-oriented approach gives you a lot of longevity to think about how your software plays, as well as how your solution plays at the same time, into the type of business that you want to create and the reuse of that business over and over and over again. So lots of different perspectives and scope that we've been able to think through once we started to recognize the need to patternize the work that we're doing. And whether it's our smallest client doing a couple weeks of work with us, or whether it's our largest client, we're bringing through our whole system a discussion on understanding this end solution as well, so we can design with that in kind and understand what the next nearest neighbor is going to be, whether it's a tiny solution or a large one, that we would need to be planning for and thinking about as an integrator or as a solution provider to go build for that enterprise. And we find that to be a very active thought process also in the minds of most of the software partners that we work with at the same time. Who are my partnerships of choice that are likely to be there that I need to make sure most seamlessly work with me, and how do we make sure that total value comes out as part of the discussion? So let's go on a slide, please. So in this, we think and we move heavily now to a perspective of thinking in terms of digital mosaic with what we do, whether it's in our vertical areas of expertise where we can provide full solution stack, and we do today in multiple cases, or whether it's with our horizontal capabilities, which really is Persistent's legacy and roots, and how I got to know Persistent 10 years ago as an executive from IBM working with Persistent, ultimately personally becoming Persistent's #1 client. The digital mosaic philosophy works in both thought processes, whether it's a solution from perhaps a digital bank or a digital manufacturing system, or perhaps a provider integration system in healthcare, or whether it's at the data lake, data content point of view, or whether it's with the user experience, or whether it's with the notion of how you do identity and digital identity management, or how you move through the environment to think about even application modernization using new capabilities and the IBA and the low code and the application modernization techniques that exist there. This notion of creating a mosaic and understanding the generic next nearest tile as well as the specific next nearest tile becomes a powerful metaphor to be able to think about how to build value. And so we lay these out in patterns both in verticals and in horizontals. We lay them out as we think about our work as an ISV. Probably about 15% of Persistent's work is still in the ISV community, with Persistent having long since grown beyond those roots of Persistent, the ISV company, but multiple companies now as enterprises and other institutions working with us. The next nearest tile and its relationship and then the total picture become a key part of the discussion on how to drive differentiation, how to work with vendors such as the software community on the products they're creating, and then also our role to always advantage the software we're partnering with. One of the things that we've endeavored to do in Persistent is clear up who we are. We're not a software company, right? We're a solutions company. And in that solution companies, wherever our software partners go, we work to understand where they still have work to do, because all of us do, And then we work to make sure that gap is filled in to complete the digital mosaic of where they want to see their solution get used. So whether it's with a Salesforce or whether it's an Appian or whether it's with an OutSystems or a Mambu or an Amazon, we know they're all on their roadmap. We know that we're moving with them, and we know that we fill in the gap and we build the solution mosaic that helps the enterprise realize the most value, so that all the next nearest neighbors are as close as possible to the software platforms that are out there in the world and the software vendors that are providing value. And so for us, it gives us a very clean way to also help get the cost the lowest way for the enterprise in terms of getting the software to be realized for its value, getting the solution on the table, and then minimizing the straight path to the value they want with the appropriate integration that's needed to get that done. So we've actually, if you move on a slide, please, to slide titled Digital Mosaics Exist in All Industries. We've drawn these out for all of the major industries we play in. These are simple, high-level paradigms that you see here of the work that we've done, but in multiple pieces of depth and architectural work, we've drawn out the digital mosaic for banking, insurance, industrial sector, and healthcare. And in that, we also have worked closely with the software community to help understand where is everybody heading and what applications and what capabilities are they building to, and how do we best provide value around that when we run into it or when we have the opportunity to talk solution to bring that software vendor in at the top level. So it really gives us a way to think about how to recommend the best solutions and the components of it, as well as when often we arrive, we find that somebody's partly down a trail that they've already created, and it helps us add clarity to the trail that they're on, both from an architectural point of view as well as from a solution point of view of what they're making. And so we believe, and we've tested, that these solutions or these mosaics exist in all industries. We likewise believe these mosaics exist in all the different horizontals that are out there as well, from solution patterns that can be taken across the entire industry. We likewise find a common componentry in much of our ISV work that we do as well. If we advance a slide to digital mosaics for ISVs, we likewise believe that in the ISV community there's a common set of requirements depending on how the software that vendors use is positioned that can be positioned as well. And again, we have an exemplary example on the slide, but we've done work in depth around the different types of software, the different solutions, and the different environments you might find it on, and the different clouds and non-cloud environments it participates in. And the components change subtly and sometimes drastically depending on those answers. And then last, in closing, and to get us to a point of question and answer, we've embarked on teaching ourselves, but I pass this along to everybody else because I really think it is just the best practice of how we all should engage in terms of getting the maximum value out of all the technology, both the software and the services and the hardware that we bring together. And you can see our imperatives in terms of how we approach the client. And to me, this is the best practice for all of us. One is, establish a business strategy, the degree of composability and the degree of speed that's needed in the market. Two, reimagine who you are. Right, we've all seen the companies that have reimagined who they are, right? And there's some great examples out there that are just evident to everybody in Uber and Airbnb and others. Reimagine who you are and what value you want to drive. Third, how do you capitalize on your data, right, in this discussion at the same time? We believe, and as much of the industry would say, in terms of the value of data, and data is king, and the usage of the data, how do you intend to capitalize on that? And let's make sure we understand the value of that. Fourth, understand your application structure, its operations, the agility you need, the opportunities you have to both drive new services as well as reduction of costs, and then bring it together, right? Really harmonize that data and that application discussion together. And then six, make sure you got your constituents bought in, which is something we've all been told since we were puppies. But make sure that your constituents are bought in and that they're maximizing customers and maximizing what they're worried about and bringing the word security into this discussion as well. So with that, it gives you an idea of how Persistent's trying to think of the world. We think the digital tiles, the software tiles, are here in abundance. We think they're here to stay. We think we are in a world of multiple tiles, more complex than where we were before. We think that there are repeatable patterns, and we see and have experienced and have written down and have brought our customers to light on repeatable patterns that are proven, both in industries and across horizontal domains. And we believe the patterns will have the opportunity for differentiation, that 20% change that will be the key business edge or the key savings edge that our clients will all get out of this. But you don't have to start with a blank piece of paper and run around the lap, with a blank piece of paper to be able to start from a best practice point of view and work to differentiation. And we believe that environment is upon us today versus starting with the blank piece of paper and a very open-ended, long drawn-out process of requirements. So with that, we released a paper just this past week. We've got it up just in time for this today. If you'd like to see our initial thoughts, they're out there. Please go download. Myself, Anand, are the authors of the paper with contributing editing from several of our other thought leaders at Persistent. We'd love your comments. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the team.